Welcome to another Wednesday Yachting Luncheon live from the St. Francis Yacht Club. We've got our beautiful bay view out the windows. What could be better? Let's see, between now and the end of the year, we only have one open slot in our speaking program. At the end of the year, you want to come by on December 12 and listen to his name, Gary Jobson. I'm going to say Gary is the most significant ambassador we in the sailing world have to the rest of the planet. In November, you want to come by and listen to former Federal Reserve Governor Bob Heller. He'll be here to talk to us all about the relationship between interest rates, inflation, and the economy. Adam Wright, CEO of Depleted Submarines, speaking of our speaker today, or speaking after our speaker today, he'll be here to talk all about the commercial business of creating these kind of submarines as accessories to resorts and entertainment. You've gone sailing, you've wanted to eat. How about the 30 Knot Gourmet, the owners and founders of that gourmet food service to cruising and racing yachts? They'll be here to talk. And we keep watching the red and white fleet sail around San Francisco Bay. They've only been doing it since 1892. They're going electric. The EVP and the guy in charge of that conversion to electric, Joe Burgard, will be here in September to talk all about the care and feeding of San Francisco's eco-friendly waterfront tourist trade. You want to come by in September to listen to lots of great speakers, including Daniel Forrester, the renowned yachting photographer, who will be here to cover the Big Boat Series, and Rich Jepson, who will be here to talk about co-founding Olympic Circle Sailing Club and the relationship between the growing world of sailing and sailing clubs and our own yacht club and others like our club. So we have great speakers in the future. Our speaker today, he's a genuine sailor. You meet people everywhere that say, yeah, I can sail. This guy, our buddy Chris, started sailing at age 4 in Newport Beach in sabots. There's a credential. Remember when Blacklaw and I, we lived in the tacticians and skipper's cabin house during the 83 America's Cup, and you'd open up the cupboards in this Balboa Island Yacht Club, and it would be a jiggle with little ornaments, little medals would say, Sabot Season Champion, 1952. Sabot Midwinter Champion, 51. And so that's a genuine sailor guy who started setting sabots in Newport Beach. He grew to a strapping 6'3", 200 plus, so he's not in sabots as much anymore. At age 17, he delivered Hana Ho, the great Santa Cruz 50, back from Hawaii with he as a 17-year-old and 3 other guys over 70. Sailed all through college on Bruce Stone boats, arbitrages of different flavors. Sailed on Tomahawk, the Frères, and other beautiful yachts from Southern California by John Arns. I sailed on Tomahawk a bunch, and it was a great crowd to be a part of. In 2004, he bought one of the most famous boats in yachting history, Ragtime. And what a beautiful creature that is. Those of us who sailed on it think it's incredible singular. It's a starboat that's 67 or whatever, counting the scoop, feet long. He raced it in 3 Transpacks, won their class, won everything in Tahiti race, and won their class in the Sydney Hobart. Who's won their class in the Sydney Hobart? Right, exactly, our speaker today. He got an interest from Steve Fawcett in submarines, and those of you who sailed with Steve, I sailed on Fawcett's boats, is an incredibly brilliant math person who's passed along these days. And when our speaker today learned he could, he bought the estate of, bought the sub from the estate, the sub program from the estate, and started messing about in submarines, and in 2014 discovered his subject today, the incredible, intriguing, and worrisome world of underwater munitions that are stored all around the world. So please welcome to our stage, Chris Welch. Chris.
Thank you, Ron, and good to see you all and all those out in Tom Eamon's world as well. It's appreciate Tom doing this and making it available to the world. So I have a submarine, a single-person deep diving submersible. It's called Pentarius. It came from Steve Fawcett. It was about 70% complete when I bought it. And I also bought the boat PlayStation, now known as Cheyenne. Had been converted to carry the sub as its mothership. So I always start out with this slide when I'm talking about the ocean because every picture we see of the world tends to have North America and Europe. This is a photo of the world. It gives you an idea how big the Pacific Ocean is, how much of the world is ocean. When you talk about this place called Earth, it really should be called ocean. Quickly going through, this is the sub launching on the Cat right here in the about to go in the water. It's different from most subs. It's winged. It's engineered to go down to 36,000 feet, and it flies like a plane on the way down. It descends with ballast. When you get to the bottom, you drop half the ballast in your neutral buoyant, use the thrusters to cruise around, and then drop the other ballast to come back up. If there's an electrical failure, the ballast all drops away. This is just what launch and recovery is like. We have it on a carriage, lift it off the carriage and move the carriage out of the way and then put it in the water, and off we go. The Cat's pretty mammoth. It's 125 feet long and a 60-foot beam. It has gone to Hawaii and back unrefueled, so it's a great mothership. It's very thrifty on fuel. We'll go around the world on 9,000 gallons of fuel, something like that, which in the ocean world of research is a very small amount. It can sprint at 23 knots, but generally we cruise around 13 knots when we're going places. Yet it's a simple system. It's a tripod over a moon pool to launch and recover the sub. And it's real effective. Out at the Farallones, we've done launch and recovery in sea state 4 and 5, so 6 and 7 knot seas, 25 knot wind. Initially, when I started the project, people threw stones in it and said it's an unproven launch and recovery project. There's no sub program in the world that can launch and recovery in sea state 6. We did it with 4 people on deck, 1 person running the boat, me running the crane, and 2 people tending to the sub as we brought it aboard. So it's just lifting and going in and out from the center of the boat is really, really nice. This is under the skin on the sub. The personnel compartment for 1 person is in the front. You're laying down sort of up on your elbows. And then there's buoyancy behind that. The personal compartment is made of carbon fiber. It's a cylinder with a glass hemisphere at the front for viewing. It's a great view. I've done about 30 test dives in the sub, and in the next 6 weeks or so, we'll be back in the water and start on our missions. Behind the buoyancy, you have batteries and motors. Subs are inherently heavy. Doesn't make sense. It's very hard to get buoyancy when you're going deep because the pressure down there is 16,000 pounds per square inch, and so it wants to crush whatever you have as buoyancy. So achieving buoyancy is a big goal for us, and every pound of buoyancy that we need takes about 2.5 pounds of buoyancy material. So the sub grows. If the sub gets a little bit heavier, it gets a lot heavier because you have to have more buoyant material, and it's not very light. It's just slightly lighter than water. So our initial dive plans in the next few months as we go into the water, we will start with our test dives, and I look at everything we do and try and get double purpose out of it. So our test dives will be coastal here, and as we advance in depth, we'll use those to dive on chemical munitions. I became interested in chemical munitions along the way of having bought the sub and talking to scientists, and I kind of feel like it's an area that doesn't have much spotlight of the magnitude of the problem. If you're a Facebook friend with me, you know that I sort of mock the whole thing of worrying about straws. And the reason why I mock it is because there are real problems to worry about, and straws are not one of them compared to the magnitude of this. So we're going to use those test dives to keep advancing the program and go deeper and deeper, but also document chemical munitions. And in the course of that, I've become allied with a couple different groups that are working on this, and we'll get into who they are and what they're doing just a few moments here. After that, we're going to take the sub and cat and go to Hawaii. On the way to Hawaii, we're going to stop and see if we can dive with sperm whales and find giant squid. We've got the speed to go down with sperm whales. They're noisy, so we can follow them down. And they're going down to feed on the giant squid. So hopefully we'll get some live action down there. Lastly, after we get to Hawaii, we have a contract to go find 4 missing World War II submarines, 2 Japanese and 2 American. 3 of those 4 are going to be pretty straightforward to find. We're going to have an autonomous underwater vehicle, an AUV on board. That does the mapping with sonar and figures out where things are, and then we'll go back with the sub to the targets and examine them and confirm that we found what we were looking for. That's motivated and paid for by some motivated individuals in naval history. They're way beyond a hobby, and it's going to be very interesting. I've found something else from World War II before, a Hellcat fighter, and it was pretty exciting when we found it. It was unexpected. And I expect, because of where we're diving, that we'll probably have a good opportunity to find aircraft on this one too. We're going to be west and south out of Honolulu, and it'd be reasonable that a lot of aircraft were lost in that area that will show up in our mapping. So chemical munitions. It sounds like an ugly term. It is an ugly term. This is sarin, VX, and mustard gas. So in World War II, we were part of the Geneva Treaty, and we were prohibited from having or using chemical munitions. So that meant we only made millions and millions and millions of pounds of them. And then nastily enough, we took the chemical munitions, and they weren't dangerous enough as a nerve gas or whatever. We felt it was a good idea to add arsenic to it. And that's actually a really important thing, because when we went to dispose of all this, everybody decided the thing to do was dump it offshore. So it was either put in ships, and the ships were sunk with munitions on board, or things were just pushed off the side. Didn't matter. It was just put in the water and forgotten. And it's actually the worst possible way to get rid of it you can think of, because down there, this stuff degrades in temperature. 80 degrees, 90 degrees, it would degrade, and it degrades in sunlight. So where'd we put it? We put it where it's 32 degrees and dark, so it's forever. And it's mostly jellified down there. It's in every single form you can imagine. It's in artillery shells, it's in bombs, it's in 55-gallon drums, it's in tin containers. It's every way that it existed, rockets, mortars, everything from World War II. So it was kind of obvious when I tell you chemical munitions dumping is bad for the ocean. But I thought, well, this is just a narrow focus, and we'll shine a light on this and help be part of a solution, part of getting people motivated about it. The sad truth is that conventional weapons are virtually equally as bad. TNT, right off the bat, is an organic compound. It degrades into carcinogenic materials. Now, the reason this is a huge problem is we intentionally, during the war, put a lot of munitions in the water, all the mines and such. We semi-intentionally put them in the water when airplanes were coming back from missions. They would drop their weapons in the water. And then post-World War II, we did it again intentionally, where we pushed them off of ships. If you look at this list here, it's a witch's brew of materials that make up explosives and the primers and such, and they're all nasty. So they are, unfortunately, there's probably 400 times as much of these materials, because they were conventional. There were tons and tons and tons of them around. When I talk about tons, I talk about, a given sarin site will have 2 million pounds of sarin. Another site will have 3 million pounds of mustard gas. Another site will have 2 million pounds of VX. You get into these munitions, you had competitions going on from different barges by the Navy to see who could dump more per day, 500 tons, 800 tons per day per barge. This is what it looks like down there. That's a drum of mustard gas down 5,000 feet off New Jersey with sea life around it. It's just starting to leak. That white around the edges is where it's corroded through, and it's starting to leak out. In my theory, your opportunity to get this is now. The containers are degrading, and so better to get down there and maybe do a little bit of a messy job cleaning up than leave it there and not be able to get any of it back over time. This gives you an idea how it got there. These ships went out loaded this way to dump. Barge loads went out like this. They'd go out, cut the cables, and all the drums would roll off into the ocean. These are some shallow photos. There's everywhere from 2 feet to 6,000, 8,000 feet depths where these sites are. There's 1,000 sites on each of our coasts. There's even worse in Europe on between Germany and Sweden, the north coast of Europe there. The east coast in Newfoundland. So think about you're a fighter pilot, and you're assigned to do escort out of Nova Scotia for Liberty ships, and they're going out, and the U-boats are coming after them. And so they flew escort as far as they could go, out 400 miles or 500 miles, escorting them. When they came back, they didn't want to land with their weaponry on board. So they drop it in the bay right before the runway at the airport. And so there's one bay in Nova Scotia that's littered with thousands and thousands of munitions, because every single mission, virtually almost none of the munitions were dumped on U-boats. Almost all of it came back and was dumped in the bay. That'll come back as an important thing in a moment. There's another shot of just, these barges unloading stuff with, you can see that ramp, sailors all the way around a barge with ramps like that rolling as much as they could into the water as fast as they could. This just gives you an idea on our coastline right here. This is not munitions dump sites. These are chemical munitions dump sites. So there's, 7 of them there in this chart. It gives you an idea, how widespread the problem is. Operation Chase, euphemistic name, stands for cut holes and sink them. We got a laugh out of Tom even on that one. But this was a real program in the United States Navy. You got rid of a Liberty ship and a bunch of munitions at once. Now, the legacy of that is more unfortunate, because if the munitions are in a ship, it's actually harder to recover them today. The ship's not lying on its side, and it's got a hold full of degraded munitions to deal with. And if you look at the sample cargoes there, mustard gas, GB, which I think is another nerve agent, VX, nasty stuff. So when you start getting deeper into this, you get some boring reading, chemical munitions of the Baltic Sea. But that's the documentation of 40,000 tons of chemical munitions north of Germany. The congressional report, this thing's a telephone book. Every site is known, and I shouldn't say every site is known. There are a great number of sites that are well known, well documented, that they're out there. My goal with the sub is to go out there and put photographs and personal vision on this, so that I can go back and talk to people like yourselves all the way up to politicians and try and motivate people to put some money towards this cleanup. So the question is, what do we do about it all? It would seem logical to me that we would want to get these things collected before they're just widely disseminated in the ocean, or more widely disseminated than they are today. There's efforts, companies underway that can break down munitions. It's not easy. If you have a 500-pound bomb, what do you do with it? Well, today's technology for a 500-pound bomb, whether it's on land or in the ocean, basically, is to blow it up in sight, in place. And in the North Sea, they're putting in windmill farms and pipelines and electrical grids. They have to do massive surveys before they go in to document where all the munitions are and then dispose them all. And every single munition, a mine, a bomb, whatever, has to be dealt with. So one by one, 20 guys in a boat are going out there. They're putting a ring of air around the munition. They're sending in an underwater demolition diver with a 5-pound charge. They're blowing the thing up. The air bubbles around it in about a 100-meter circle are to diffuse the sound wave that comes off it, so the damage to whales and sea life is lessened. And that's one bomb taken care of. And you have 40,000 tons of chemical bombs and 10, 15, 20 times that of conventional weapons to deal with. This piece of equipment here that you're seeing is a piece of equipment that you can take bombs to and dispose of them here. They're heated. The bomb material is cooked off and collected and scrubbed so it doesn't go in the environment. And it's bomb-proof in cells so that this can all happen safely with humans around. But the problem of it is scale. This unit takes care of 5 kilograms at a time. So if you've got a 500-pound bomb that's 250 kilos, you've got to cut it up into 50 pieces and then piece by piece put them in the conveyor belt and cook them off and get rid of them, recover the steel. So it's a long ways from being solved.
What's the temperature? What's that mean?
I don't know the temperature they use. I would expect it in the several hundred degrees range, and they break down the whatever's in the active agent. And it's small enough that if it goes off, if under 5 kilos goes off, it won't destroy the machine. And then they scrub it and capture it. And they've got a couple of these machines. There's another one being built here in America for our mustard gas disposal. But we're on a onesie basis, taking on all the output of the United States in military munitions from 1941 to nearly present, because it doesn't stop. Just because World War II is over, it's not over. So this is just a quick list of like the services that company offers, and you start looking at it and go, you know, you can't cut bombs with a skill saw. You got to use a water jet. That's not quick. You got melt out systems. You got systems to capture the mustard gas, capture the VX, whatever it is. So it's not easy. So where does this all lead? And this is IDUM, which is an IDUM. It's an unfortunate name, but it's the International Dialogue on Underwater Munitions. This is my introduction to the UN. When you're do things at the UN, you don't form a committee, you form an international dialogue. But a very, very hardworking, earnest gentleman by the name of Terry Long, he's a Canadian ex-military officer from Demolitions. He was part of creating a research center in Switzerland to take care of landmines. We have landmines all over the world. There was no technology and no practices and no teaching about what to do with them. So they got together, and the UN funded and nations funded a site to deal with landmines, and it's very successful. There's no way the UN alone can lead the parade, so their goal is to teach people how to lead their own parade at home. So the same thing they want to do for underwater munitions, create a research and development setting, bring people in, do the research, figure out how to get rid of these things, and then send them back to their homelands to deal with their homeland waters and do the cleanup. And as a function of who's involved and a function of all those bombs dropped off Nova Scotia by fighter planes escorting Liberty ships, the current push is to get this center in Nova Scotia. They can practice out front in the bay. There's lots of work to be done. They've got land. They've got a lot of government support. To give you an idea how big a problem this is in the eyes of the UN does a every 10-year list of all the biggest problems in the world, and there's 4,000 items on that list. Underwater munitions were ranked 14th. When they announced it, in 30 days, they got $7 million of funding from various nations just to start the research on where this was going to be done to create a research center. This is the long-form description of what I just told you. The goal is to create this research center and teach the world how to deal with the munitions in their backyard. Within that, there's, of course, more acronyms. A decision aid for marine munitions. What do? You know, we want to give you a decision tree on how to deal with it. And then a monitoring of dump sites too, because another part of this is what are the human impacts. So to jump back to north of Europe, north of Germany, there's a quarter-inch thick layer of sediment on the bottom of the ocean there in the Baltic Sea that is contaminated with arsenic from all those chemical munitions. There's a notion about that the lessened fish catch is not the product of overfishing, which certainly probably has some impact, but the fact that these fish are laying their eggs in arsenic, and that's probably not very effective. So it's a very real problem. Going forward to today, like I said a moment ago, the problem did not end with World War II and all the munitions of World War II. Everything we have today in our munitions has a date on it. Everything we have expires. Every 500-pound bomb has to be dealt with. One of the ways we deal with it today, dig a hole, put 50 of them in the hole, put in some RDX or whatever, and blow them up. That's not a great solution. It's slow and inefficient to begin with. Every bit of chemicals and organic chemicals in those bombs is released in the environment as a product of that. So it's just not a very great way of doing it. Go into modern warfare, and depleted uranium is a big part of modern warfare because it's for large bullets, the A-10 tank bullets and such, anti-tank bullets, use depleted uranium. The current methodology to get rid of depleted uranium from our sites where we have gunnery ranges is to collect them and burn the depleted uranium. You end up with uranium oxide in the air, which is also not a good solution. I'm very pro-military, but you know, there's definitely better ways to do it than the way we're doing it right now. So that's the scope of what we're trying to do with chemical munitions and the center that we're trying to create. My involvement in it is to be both a visual aid, you know, try and go out there and document it and bring it back in a way that lay people can understand the magnitude of the problem and talk to their elected officials. The guys in Canada and around the world are out there trying to get the monies together and the UN push behind it to create this center. I think the money will flow there. They're looking at a $250 million budget to do this research center. That sounds like a lot of money, but when you start trying to create bomb-proof enclosures to disassemble things, it's a very real problem. Takes a lot of money to solve. So that's the effort we have underway, and appreciate your time listening to me on this, and we'll keep you updated as we go.
Welcome again to our Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. Our guest today is Chris Welsh. The subject is disposal of underwater munitions. So Chris, if we did nothing, I saw in your report that we have 150 million kilotons of submerged demolition out there in the ocean. What happens if we do nothing?
Inevitably, if you leave all this here, you're going to have further degradation of the ocean. It's just inevitable. And the containers are going to break down, and you're just going to spread the poisons and the materials wider. It's also a real health risk to us, for exposure. It's exposure risk to the fish we're eating. And then it's also an exposure risk from the violent type of exposure of bombs where you can find articles with drag fishermen all the time bringing up a mustard gas bomb or mustard gas canister, and all of a sudden you have 7 guys in a fishing boat contaminated and going to the hospital. Their fishing gear is contaminated. The Coast Guard's responding. They're not prepared to deal with that. So it's a very real problem.
What's the slow degradation look like? You're going down in the sub looking. Can you see anything seeping out, or is sea life around it starting to be affected? How can you see what's happening?
There's definitely, I'd have to say there's the resiliency of the sea showing in a lot of places, but on a bigger scale, there are documented plumes from these bombs. Think, what's a bomb mean? It's something that oxidizes quickly. It takes its oxygen up quickly. So a given bomb that opens up can create an anoxic, whatever, no oxygen environment in a given radius, and you can see a plume of death behind it because of the lack of oxygen. In concentrated areas, you can see bigger scale lack of oxygen and fish kill off and such from it.
And for those who are new to our format, if you have a question, raise your hand. John will bring the mic to you, and you'll ask a question. I'll keep asking questions, seeing when I don't see any from the audience. So now you're discovering these and exploring this field with your underwater sub. Give us some dimensions of this sub. How long is it? How much does it weigh? How fast does it go?
The sub's 22 feet long. The wingspan's 11 feet. The passenger compartment is basically my size. Fortunately, Steve was my size, so it was built around him and fits me. It's pretty cozy. It's an inch wider than my shoulders inside there, and there's a lot of gear around you, and it's pretty warm. It's very quiet. The carbon fiber tube is 5 inches thick. The glass is 5 inches thick. You can barely discern the sound of the thrusters behind you. That's the only sound that comes through inside. Otherwise, it's just quiet and focus on where you're trying to go and what you're trying to do.
How tall is it?
Well, you're in a tube lying on its side, and so it's 26 inches ID inside.
And what's the speed you're tooling around at?
So normally when you're just observing, you're going to be doing 1 or 2 knots. It can go about 6.5, 7 knots. Going down and up, it'll go faster because we effectively have about 220 pounds of thrust via gravity down or up, and it kicks along. And it's more like how much you can take, how much you can go head below feet to go down, for instance, what angle you can handle.
And what's the length of time you can be in it?
There's 24 hours of life support on board, so a typical mission would be in the 10-hour range. Once you're there, it's a lot of effort to get out there and get the sub in the water and do it all, so you might as well see as much as you can.
And give me some metrics around the battery power of it.
The battery power is around 10 miles of range. So if you think about a big mission, if you're going down 8,000 feet, you're going to translate 3 miles or 2.5 miles if you do a straight translation down, like landing to a runway, and then go 5 or 6 miles on the seafloor, and then come back up another 3 miles. And depending on what your game plan is on that, you're going to end up 10, 12 miles away from where you started.
What's the PSI the sub can take, and what's the greatest depth you think it can handle?
Well, it's engineered for 36,000 feet, which is 16,000 psi. We are diving initially with an acrylic dome, which will limit us to about 12,000 feet. We're going to use those dives to gather data on the hull and do a better fitting of the glass dome. When I say a better fitting, a better mating of the glass dome to the carbon, based on the data we get from these dives.
So what's the depth of most of these munitions? And I understand there's tens of thousands of sites, but are mostly they shore-based disposal areas, or what?
I think a rough number. I mean, they truly are everywhere from 2 feet to 6,000 feet, but I think the 1,800, 2,000, 2,500 foot depth is pretty common. Most of these sites were fairly selective, that they put some depth to it when they were trying to get rid of it.
And what were the years of the most disposal?
All the 60s, from the mid 50s into the late 60s, and it really became in the late 60s. The cut holes and sinking program was the first program that sort of got the limelight that maybe this wasn't a good idea, and had some pushback from the population.
Yes, we have a question from the audience. Yes.
This is so depressing. So aside from being all depressed, we're also kind of conditioned nowadays to think that technology has wonderful solutions to all of our problems. And is there some kind of a solution to this problem? And how long will it take? If there were some ideal one, what would you imagine?
Well, so the question is, is there, besides the depression of all this, is there a solution? And can technology help us? And the answer, I think, reassuringly, is yes, to a point. And that's the whole point of this center being created to begin with, is to do the R&D, to come up with automated solutions and automated recovery systems. Don't put people at risk. Use automated sensors to map out the fields quicker and better, and then do the recovery of the materials. And that piece of equipment I showed you that can do 5 kilos at a time, it's at least a piece of equipment that runs on an ongoing basis, 24/7 potentially. So if that's scaled up and you have better ways of doing that, and they're automated, you'll get rid of this better. In our lifetimes, I don't think you're going to see it done. I mean, finished. There's just too much of it out there. But it certainly will be credible if we get the center built and get efforts underway.
Yes, John.
Can these materials be nuked? Are they worse than the aftermath of a nuclear explosion? And there have been a lot of nuclear testing to serve as a precedent.
The question is, can they be nuked per se? They can be thermally broken down, and that's what that equipment is doing, is it's breaking it down, and then it's scrubbing the gases that come off and capturing it rather than releasing in the environment. I'd say that's the best case, and that doesn't matter whether it's chemical munitions or conventional munitions, because the conventional is actually just as dangerous in the end. So you want to capture the stuff. To the extent it can be neutralized by breaking it down, that's ideal. It's less active going forward.
So how much is currently being recovered, and who's recovering the most at this point?
Right now, so there's actually virtually no recovery today that's meaningful. There's disposal in these 5 kilo lumps, but this 5 kilo lump thing, the reason the 5 kilos exist, one mortar shell in World War II that's recovered in England or in Germany and needs to be disposed of is put on some bomb-proof deal and hauled off to this site and burned up. That's a onesie basis. There is no large-scale effort today anywhere in the world actually gathering open materials. The only other thing that exists is for the sake of underwater construction, like in the North Sea and other places, where they're mapping out what's in the way and they're blowing it up. But again, they're not recovering it, gathering it, preventing it from going in the environment.
So given that in wartime, my pop was in World War II, and when I listen to him tell the very few stories I can pull out of him, and he's passed along now, they really were not sure of their own future. They were not sure they could get through the war. So one can imagine how they didn't have long-term, what's going to happen with these disposed munitions. But what country dropped the most and has disposed, of the most munitions? Was it us? Is it our European partners?
So I think you'd find in the years up to 1955, you would probably look at Europe, and you would look at what was disposed of out of Europe, and that became a witch's brew, whether it was ours or German, didn't matter.
Right.
But I mean, let's put a number on this. For example, the mines in Europe deployed in World War II, 900,000. They're all still out there. Virtually none were recovered. So when you talk about doing
Were they
these,
sunk?
yeah, they were tethered down there, and they've, you know, mostly when they're found today, they're cracked open. They're probably not going to explode, but they still have primers. There's still a threat from them. Going forward from 1955, though, unfortunately, you know, there's probably a horse race between us and the Russians as who did the worst. We had a lot more of it. The Russians had a lot nastier stuff. So, but theirs was all local. Ours is all around the world. You know, Vieques has a huge toxic problem because of all the bombs dropped there. You know, like something like 20% of bombs don't go off, so there's still duds lying around all over the place. The ones that do go off have different toxic residue, so it's a problem.
Question.
Yes, it sounds like a very expensive problem, and the scale is massive. What is the discussion about who is going to pay for it? Are the governments going to step up, U.S. and other governments?
So the question I think you all heard was around who's going to pay for this. It's a big number. You know, I think the good news is this is something that the UN can be effective at, of raising money from all the governments, getting coalition built to do this work. They were very quick with the first monies to do studies at the start. And I think that when the center is located and announced and they look to get the monies behind it, I think you'll find that the standard Big Five, Big Seven nations coming to the table to help do the cleanup. And then from there it becomes training. You know, Angola has a huge amount of weapons from their civil war. You want to train the Angolans to go home and deal with it in country, in situ.
Keith.
I seem to recall when Steve Fawcett started the submarine program that he was involved to some degree with Richard Branson. Am I right there?
Well, the question is the involvement of Steve and Richard Branson. Steve did a lot of sponsorship deals and partnership deals with Richard and with Virgin. I initially, with the sub-project, was partnered with Virgin through a variety of things, both just simple expense and Virgin Galactic in what was going on in their world. Continue our project, we separated, and so I've carried it on my own.
So a mechanical question. If you pull apart a bomb, I mean, is it automatically going to explode, or can you damage it so that it's no longer explosive and pull it apart that way?
Well, that comes down to the answer is you want to thermally break down the materials, ideally without setting off the bomb, and break these long chains down into lesser chains, less threatening chains. When I say chains, hydrocarbon chains.
Molecular chains, right.
Molecular chains. And break it down into a less volatile material. That's the objective. And then from that point, it can even be scrubbed further and essentially denatured.
So how often when you dispose of these, are you doing it that way, mechanically or chemically pulling it apart versus just
Well, that's the sad truth today, that if it's over 5 kilos, either you're taking it and water jetting it into smaller pieces, but really if it's over 5 kilos, it has risk. If it's a 250-pound, 500-pound, 1,000-pound bomb, just moving it has risk for sure. And who's going to be the volunteer to do that move? It's just not fair to ask somebody to do it. So those bombs are all blown up in place.
You said water jetting. You mean water jetting?
They use that to cut it like a sausage into 5 kilo pieces, and then those are put in the machine. But if you have a bomb that we're trying to dispose of that's gone out of date and sitting in a warehouse somewhere, that's okay. It's in a container. It can readily be transported somewhere and dealt with. If it's on the seafloor, you don't know its condition. You don't know its primer condition. You don't know anything at all about it, and you're not going to know. So that becomes, what do you do? And that's part of what the center wants to apply itself to, is bring the minds together to find solutions. Something, better than just blowing each one up.
Have people been hurt disposing of these water?
Oh yeah, for sure. In the North Sea, you have 20 companies with 35 employees apiece doing this to try and keep up, and they're all completely filled to the gills with work. And so you have underwater demolition diving going on every day there, and that's dangerous business.
And who's paying them?
That's being paid for by the pipeline, the undersea grid, the windmill installer.
So the commercial entity that wants to exploit that area is paying, what's the
Correct.
cost per kiloton to remove, or is there any other metrics around removal cost?
You know, I don't know, but if I could just quickly generate that every one of those ships with an underwater diver and all this stuff, if they're doing 2 per day, I'd be surprised. And their daily costs have got to be, $30,000, $35,000 a day
So that would be 15,000, 20,000
per bomb.
Per bomb.
And look at the mines. You have 900,000 mines out there. So you have 1 million mines out there at 15,000 apiece. That's $15 billion.
Right, 15B.
Yeah.
John Cumberbatch, the senior member in the room. Sir, let's hear it for John Cumberbatch. He's been a member for 60 years. John and Mary.
What is the visibility through the dome of the submarine of, say, like at 1,000 feet and 5,000 and 10,000 feet?
There's a question on the sub and the visibility. It's as good. The dome itself is a full hemisphere. It's as translucent as water, so it's lovely to look through. In terms of what's outside, you can be surprised. A lot of places you get nice clarity. The deeper you get, you tend to have very little currents and good clarity. I've gone off in Newport doing test dives on what appeared to be a gorgeous blue water day, and 20 feet down there was an organic soup that was like Italian salad dressing. So you just don't know.
Isn't it dark in depth?
Oh yeah, it is dark at depth. Yeah, the question is it dark at depth? So the best case scenario in a sub at 800 feet in perfectly tropical clear water, it's going to be going dark. Worst case, I dove in Seattle and we were full dark at probably 80 feet or 60 feet because there was so much in the water.
So you're visiting with us here at the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, live from the St. Francis Yacht Club. And we should take a moment to thank our good friend Tom Eamon and Sailing Illustrated for helping us with the Facebook live stream. Terrific.
And I'm going to thank Julia because without Julia pushing him, I don't know if Tom would get here.
A good point. Excellent point, Chris. In fact, Julia has a question or a comment from the cyberspace. Julia.
Just in general, there have been a lot of positive statements about sharing this information and how nice it was to be able to have access to it. But the question from Jim Lucier is that, for Chris, is to describe dumping that occurred around the Farallones here near San Francisco, and what, if anything, has been done about it.
So the Farallones dumping, I have some knowledge of, not a tremendous amount of knowledge of, but from what I know of it, there was radiological dumping out there. That's the big one that gets all the press and all the headlines. So the raw reality is there are conventional dumping sites going out here for sure too, but that's the one that's gotten all the press. As far as I know, it's been mapped but not remediated. Again, as far as I know, there was significant radiological dumping at the Navy base there on Alameda. That's been remediated. That's been gathered up. This is how small the problems of World War II are. That was simply from the painting of aircraft instruments with glow paint being washed off and spilling in the bay. So just the efforts of think how little amount that is, how little a task that is, and that created a big radiological problem.
We should thank Jim Lucier because he's also responsible for bringing Coral.com to speak here in a couple of weeks to review the issues around coral reefs and the danger that they're under worldwide.
Dick Anderson has noted that our speaker has acquired a beard.
So, thank you. Let's see, if you were to describe the ideal, Mr. Netcher, question, sir?
No, I had a question that was just answered.
Oh, good for you. Good. So, if you were to prescribe the ideal solution, who would you say should be responsible, and how would they go about resolving this big problem?
So, there's obviously I'm biased towards IDEM and them. They've done an enormous amount of work getting the momentum together to have a research center and go after having a center point of excellence for this to be dealt with. So that's number one. I'd love to see, the UN is a very political topic. This is where the UN can shine, bringing people together around a global problem. So seeing that solved at both a government level, I'd love to see the Coca-Colas of the world doing their part too to support an effort like this, because it's one that's going to affect us all in the long run. So, corporate enterprise around this. But really, it's hard to overstate the importance of sending people back to their homelands with the knowledge of how to do it. Because you can't do this from the top down with 5 nations monitoring the world. It's sending people back to every nation to take care of their own backyards. And I think that's really what should happen, and that's what ITEM's mission is, to create a center for that teaching to go on.
So your solution, if I'm hearing you correct, is for a central organizing entity, ITEM potentially, to help map out and scope a problem which would be handled geographically by the regions where the munitions are. So
Exactly. Exactly, yeah. You want a center for excellence to how to deal with this problem. You want to bring good minds together to how to deal with it the most efficient ways possible, the safest ways possible, and then send the people back out. And then the other thing that ITEM, that is part of that mission, is not just remediation of the problem, but better technologies and how to map out where the problems are and what the effects are and what we should be doing to counter that. Where are we seeing human effects?
And so in terms of responsibility, you're saying let's not pay attention to who might have dropped them. Rather, instead, let's distribute the responsibility by those who geographically have them located and need to get them removed.
That goes some part hand in hand. The Angolans in their own civil war, for example. I'm beating on the Angolans today, but they had a civil war. Those munitions were there. But those munitions were sold to them by us, the Swedes, and not intrinsically by us through who knows how many parties were involved. The North Koreans. Everybody sold munitions to every one of these conflicts. So it's a global problem.
Another question from the audience. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir. Thanks. So you said the Coca-Colas of the world, but you didn't mention Chevron and Exxon and BP. They're in these waters. Why aren't they helping?
Well, I don't know that you'd say they're not helping. I mean, they're the ones funding pipelines and oil installations and such, and doing cleanup locally. Now, that's self-serving cleanup for sure. But I don't think, in my experience, I wouldn't throw a lot of stones at them being the worst offenders. I've been on oil platforms and such, and there's an enormous amount of effort put into to do it right. But to the extent that they want to, be there as part of their paying back to the environment, that's great. That's a wonderful way. It's in their backyard. It's in the water. It's around them.
Question from committee member Kathy Trafton. Kathy.
Yes, I have a question for you going forward. Looking at how weapons are designed, is there any thought about how they could be designed better so they wouldn't have this residual effect into the future once whatever wars or problems are over? How do you make weapons less lethal? Isn't that crazy?
That's a valid question, and just as I run through it in my mind, I would question in warehouses, and they're just sitting on a shelf, nobody talking about the fact that the expiration date was 1987, and they're still there today. That's the most common disposal method today, is just to warehouse it. Where this goes, though, there's an inherent problem, like why is depleted uranium used? It's more lethal. Are you going to get them to back away from using that? It's a huge problem, and it's a huge problem if you back away from it. The weapon system doesn't work the way you intended. So it's very tough to answer that one in a way that we're all going to be happy with.
How far away is the charge now? I get that all these weapons are of different sizes, but give us some sense underwater if you blow up one of these bombs. And is that how 50% of them are disposed of, 10% of them? What percent are demolished?
So video I've seen of one typical demolition of a mine from World War II, that the mine was quite obviously 50% gone. I mean, it had rusted through. Half or more of the explosive material was gone. 5 kilos of explosive material was put on it. It made a pretty impressive kaboom. When it went off, it was in 40 feet of water. And, there was a fair amount of energy expended, but I would say all the energy I saw in that situation was from the munitions, from the 5 kilos that was put on it.
From the demolition
Yeah.
device used to disarm the bomb.
Right, more so than the bomb itself. I can't tell you if it, the TNT or whatever it is does break down over time, and it's going to become less volatile over time.
Less toxic?
No. Unfortunately, it breaks down to more toxic. It's carcinogens that are the byproducts, but less volatile.
To help us get a picture, so that one that you saw disposed of in 40 feet of water, how high was the wave out of the water when it happened?
There was no wave. It was white water, 10 meters, 8 meters in the air above it.
Okay.
And just a big froth, and it was done.
20, 30 feet of
Yeah.
okay,
And
explosion.
it was done. There was no wave that went out or anything like that.
Had they done anything to get animals, fish away from it?
So that's where they put this ring of bubbles all the way around it, and that's part of why it's so slow. You have to put out a 100-meter ring of bubbles and hook up compressors and have the bubblers going. They're weighted so they'll stay down there. You have to get that whole air current going just to do one demolition.
How do you get the fish that are inside that circle out of it?
I think there's an opportunity for fish soup on each one of these. To be direct about it, what they're trying to do is they're trying to prevent the marine mammal death. The fish and all don't like the bubbles to begin with, but the marine mammals, it significantly de-energizes the shock waves to have this bubble layer.
Paul Kamen, question.
How do you keep the inside of the view hemisphere from fogging up? Do you use very cold, dry air inside, or do you have heated defrosters?
So there's a couple solutions there. One, it stays pretty tempered inside. It gets a bit humid inside, but the glass is not actually a good conductor of heat. So you don't have what you're used to on a Coke bottle doesn't happen so much with this. We do have one little fan on it, and then we put on a silicone agent that sort of rejects rejects moisture. And the combination, I've not had a problem in the past with it.
Another question from the ether via Julia. Julia.
Yes, and this is for Chris from Peter McDonald.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing this information to light. Great job. The governments or UN should handle this. Also, the corporate world should participate.
Agree with that with Peter, and say hello to Newport.
Say hello to Newport, yeah.
We have a question from Bruce Monroe. Bruce.
So, Chris, to date, what has been the worst leak of chemical munitions, and what have been the consequences?
That it's obviously a huge kind of question. What's breadth and what's worse? The first answer that came to mind for me was Fukushima, which is not chemical munitions at all, particularly, but huge leak. But I would say that the North Coast, the Baltic Sea, is compounded by the fact that there's not a lot of water movement there. Just the sheer numbers, the volume of weaponry that was put in the water there was so big. Because post-World War II, just everything was pushed in the water there. And so you have a confined waterway with, millions of tons. So, oh, absolutely. No, they've done studies, broad studies across the whole Baltic Sea. The question is it leaking out, or what's the current effect today there in the Baltic? They've done broad studies where you can find the arsenic everywhere, and that alone is a sign that it is gone everywhere. And then this thing of plumes of anaxonic, I'm not saying that right, but no oxygen plumes is well documented, for every weapon that's out there, that there's a down current plume of degradation, and that's. It's just so hard to put into a scale, because you go off 50 miles off New Jersey, there's 3 million pounds of mustard gas in one place. How big a problem is that? That's huge to me. You go to the next one, there's 2 million pounds of VX. That's huge. Each one of these in its own right is a worse than Love Canal.
Another question from the audience. Yes, sir.
Yes, what current and future efforts are there to inform politicians about this problem, and really let them know what it is and how to solve it, and how to get the money?
That would be, that's, I mean, one of the tasks I put myself to, and our group item has put itself to. The good news is there is some reasonable participation. So CDC named this the biggest threat to humanity that they know of, to give you an idea of scale. You think of pandemics and things like that. They came forward and said that this is a huge problem. The U.S. Navy, though, has put some efforts in funding. They're not fighting it any longer and saying, you know, not our problem. They're starting to realize that this is going to be dealt with, and it's going to have to be dealt with. The Army actually got there first. The first ROV in the U.S. government for munitions was a dump site of the Army's, and everybody pointed at the Navy and said, go fix it, and the Navy said, not ours. And so the U.S. Army ended up buying the first ROV to start looking into this problem.
So what percent of your time are you spending on this issue? You're a citizen. This isn't a responsibility anyone gave you. This is one you've taken upon yourself. What percent of your time are you spending on it?
You know, the sub-project is probably about half my time in total, and all the facets of it, whether it's this or diving, you know, after sperm whales or diving after the subs we're trying to find, it's all melded together. So, you know, there's probably 5% or something. But I think it's something that we can be effective on. The sub has the potential for a lot of visibility. Nominally for item, we will be their figurehead or their mascot because of the visibility we can bring to the problem.
Tom, and you can put up on the screen contact information for Chris. Chris, if people want to participate and help in any way, what's the website they would go to, or what's the email address that you'd recommend?
DeepSubLLC.com is our website.
DeepSubLLC.com.
And Pentarius is the name of the sub, so they both end up the same place, Pentarius.com.
Well, as a fellow sailor, I want to say good on you, mate, for taking this challenge on. It's wonderful. It's very valuable. It's very, very thoughtful service to the Earth. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon live from the St. Francis Yacht Club, and the luncheon is adjourned.
Thank you.